Okay, we're live. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the study session of the University City Council to order at 5:30. Before we begin, are there any changes to the agenda as presented? Hearing none. Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor and council members, tonight I ask that you receive a presentation on our purchasing policy and provide any direction that you believe is appropriate. Tonight, we have our finance director, Keith Cole, that will be doing the presentation. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Rose, Honorable Mayor, members of council. As Mr. Rose was saying, that I'm just going to, we're kind of updating and kind of revamping our purchasing policy. It's been a while since it's been updated. And this evening, I was just wanting to just kind of touch the highlights of the actual policy. First of all, the mission of the policy is to generate fair and open competition to receive the best prices, terms, and conditions that we can get for the city. The purpose of the policy is to establish purchasing guidelines that will ensure that the city receives maximum value for every public dollar spent. The vision of a policy is to serve the citizens and customers of the city through greater efficiencies, both in terms of economy and services and the procurement of quality supplies, equipment, and services. The goals that we've established for this policy is to comply with federal, state, and local statutes of public purchasing, to ensure integrity of public procurement, and to coordinate purchasing functions between various departments, to receive maximum value for each public dollar spent by awarding purchases to the lowest responsible bidder, to ensure consistent use of the purchasing procedures, and to provide each department the goods, equipment, and services at the time and place needed and in the proper quantity and quality. Some people might say, what is purchasing? So purchasing is the process of identifying, selecting, and buying goods and services. Purchases are to be made as economically as possible within an acceptable time frame and meeting the standards of quality and service required by our departments. Why a purchasing policy? Purchasing accounting of goods and services could be numerous and complex. So the main thing to have a policy is to comply with statutes and ordinances governing by the city. And the most of all is to comply with our internal controls. As part of the our code, we have a purchasing agent. The city manager, pursuant to the city's charter and council, has appointed the purchasing authority and responsibilities to a purchasing agent. And the purchasing agent is an employee of the finance department, and that is part of our code. Part of the purchasing process, we have requisitions and we have purchase orders. Before we get to the purchase order, we have what we call a requisition, and that is to initiate the procurement process. And then by each department will, by a designee, they will enter a requisition into our accounting system. And then and those requisitions must be approved by the department director. And then once those gets approved, it turns into a purchasing order. And by purchasing order, turns into a formal offer to buy that specified commodity, materials, equipment, or service. Then along with some of the purchases, we have some general guidelines. Purchases for personal use by employees of the city are prohibited. City employees are also prohibited from using the city's name, or the employee's position to obtain special consideration in personal purchases. All employees of the city have chosen to serve the public and therefore shall not accept, grant, or be influenced in their duties by any offer of payment, gift, or favor from any source other than the compensation from the city. Conflict of interests. No officer, employee of the city shall participate in a contract for supplies or services when that person knows the officer, employee, or any member of the officer's or employee's immediate family, or if they know the business or organization in which the officer, employee, or any member of that officer or employee's immediate family has a financial interest in the contract. Some additional guidelines, cooperative procurement programs. So all of our departments, we are encouraged to use the cooperative purchasing contracts, such as those are available through the state of Missouri and St. Louis County. St. Louis County and the state of Missouri, they offer various contracts to participating municipalities, permitting procurement from vendors from whom they have pulled contracts. Competitive bidding. Before any purchases are made, ample opportunity shall be given for competitive bidding. And some types of competitive bidding is requests for proposals and requests for qualifications. Emergency purchases. There are in times that we do have to make emergency purchases, but those are very minimal, but those are sometimes in need. But the department directors, they are authorized to make emergency purchases, provided their approval by the finance department. Another guideline is that the city manager is authorized to approve contracts for professional services that are under $25,000. And something that we want to add in this updated policy that wasn't in our previous policy is the minority women-owned business enterprises. And this is part of our code. So we're trying to establish a policy and a procedure that we really abide by that. So part of this is the city causes vendors, contractors, and subcontractors to take good faith actions to achieve the minority women-owned business enterprise contracts. So part of this, if any contract that the city goes into that has more than $50,000 and they hold more than 10 employees in that workforce, then at least 20% of that workforce should be generally classified as minority women-owned business. And also, if it's more than 100,000, that there should be at least two or more subcontractors within that contract that has at least 15% of the subcontractors that has the workers that are members of the minority women-owned businesses. And we actually have two companies that we're working with right now. It's Highland Construction and Trivers. They are part of that. In addition with that, there's personal requirements with respect to the employees of the owners. So as many as possible, the city contracts over $1,000 shall be entered into the following. So any individual that's classified as a member of a minority and or female, firms consisting of individuals generally classified as members of minorities and or female, and corporations, stock, which is owned by individuals generally classified as members of minorities and females. All minority and or female firms, corporations, or individuals shall file an affidavit with the city prior to commencing work that they are a minority and or female firm. And in order for to establish the purchasing guidelines, that has requisitions and purchase orders. So purchases that are under $1,999, the department can purchase with a issued credit card through the department. And the department director must sign off and for those type of purchases. So these are the next, I mean, those are the guidelines on how we, but there's, when we go out for bid and if there's minimum, if they're, the bids are solicited or not. But so the first one, it was purchased under $1,099, doesn't require a purchase order. But purchases between $2,000 and $14,999.99. These purchases have a minimum of 3 written bids to be solicited either through phone, mail, or email or fax. So these types of bids must be attached to the requisitions when entered into the system. And then the next dollar amount, it's purchases from $15,000 to $24,999 requires a minimum of 3 written bids to be solicited. And again, the departments, you know, they really require that the paperwork is attached to the requisition so we know that it's been signed off. And so any of the purchases that are over 25,000, these must be advertised and requested as sealed bids. And these, all these type of purchases must be approved by City Council. There are some guidelines. Purchases of goods and services that equal or exceed 2,000 require a purchase order, except for City Council approved service contracts, intergovernmental agreements, insurance, banking, investment transactions, land acquisitions, lease payments, utilities, debt service, payroll, professional service as defined, and maintenance contracts associated with copyright software. All capital improvement projects, they will require purchase order. Unauthorized purchases and just come purchasing ethics. No employee has the authority to enter contractual relationships for the city without prior approval of a purchasing agent. Conflict of interest. No employee of the city or their immediate family shall have any financial interest in the award of a contract or purchase. All employees of the city shall keep themselves free of obligation by refusing to accept any significant gifts. And terms and conditions of the invitation for bids. We reserve the right, as the interest of the city may require, we can reject any bid or all bids. The city may make an award or on any items for a quantity less than what's been bidded out. And the city shall award a contract while conforming to the specifications and requirements whose bid will most economically be advantageous to the city. So these are just kind of like some of the highlights of the policy that we were proposing. And if you have any additional questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Mr. Cole, thank you very much for your presentation. To my colleagues, do any of you have questions of Mr. Cole at this time? And if you do, you may have to raise your hand. I think I see Mr. Clay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro. Mr. Cole, thank you for your presentation. Some municipalities or public bodies have preferences for businesses that originate within their geography. So for example, St. Louis City, for their contracting purposes, if you're a business in the city, you get preferences as it relates to bids. Do we have anything like that here?
Yes, that is included in the policy. I just didn't include it. It's in the detail of the actual policy.
Okay.
Yes.
And you mentioned Trivers was, when you said part of that, were you referring to they're under the auspices of, even though this policy has not been officially adopted, you're operating with them under these auspices?
Correct, because one of the owners is a female. So we kind of gauge that as a female part of that.
Okay. And so as I understand the steps, you're writing this into policy. Does this need to be approved by council, or is this to handle at an administrative level?
I believe at this, I mean, part of that, that is already in the code, so that wouldn't need to be approved. I think it just needs to be affirmed
Okay,
with the updated policy.
okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Cusick.
Thank you, Mayor Crowe. Thank you, Mr. Cole. I have a couple of questions. And I'm assuming that it's obvious, but when this policy pertains to University City, which parts of University City? Does it include the police department and the fire department?
Yes.
And what about the other political subdivisions? What about, I guess it excludes the library?
We tried to include it to be encompassing, but I can verify with the library director, Patrick Wall, but we tried to include them as well.
And then what about the other political subdivisions? The two that I can think of would be the LSBD and Parkview Gardens Association.
I need to get further clarification for those two.
Okay, thank you. And then very briefly, under the emergency purchases, very briefly, what were some past examples of what emergency purchases were?
Honestly, I haven't been involved with any emergency purchases, so I'm not for sure what they would be considered. But since I've been here, I've never come across an emergency purchase.
Okay. And then when we authorize a contract with someone, what if they have subcontractors? What type of oversight is in place to make sure the subcontractors are fulfilling the terms of any type of an agreement we may have with someone?
We rely on the contractor, that they work with them, and then we keep following up with the contractors to make sure that they're having the proper paperwork with the subcontractors.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rose, you wanted to amplify?
Yes, Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Kusick, there have been two areas, at least since I've been here, where we have exercised the use of emergency purchases. One was early on regarding bringing the ambulance service back. And if you recall the purchase, I want to say, of the ambulance, and then I asked that you ratify that decision. The second one has more to do with the coronavirus, and there were several purchases that were made that were associated with that. I don't know that if collectively they all totaled to more than $25,000, but if not, they were very close. And so when I look at those types of purchases, I look at them more globally for the organization as a whole, but did not take the time to calculate of whether they did exceed $25,000 because we were in an emergency, pandemic situation. So those are the only two that I'm familiar with at this time.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Hales.
Thank you. I was just curious, are there, and it doesn't need to be exhaustive at all, but any notable changes that in reviewing this you came across and
One thing that I changed the dollar amounts because the original one, it was like under $999. You could use a credit card for purchase, but by looking at and reviewing other municipalities, they usually go at the lowest is at $1,999, and it's usually like in 4 categories. So I just kind of based it off what other municipalities were doing, and it seemed like everybody was kind of all in agreement with that.
Thank you.
Cost wise.
Mr. Smotherson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Crowe. Just a very quick, simple question, and that is, and Mr. Rose, you can correct me if I can ask this, but Mr. Director Coles, who is the purchasing agent? Because obviously that can't be you.
Well,
Is that something I can ask or just kind of out of curiosity?
the position is appointed in the finance department. And my understanding, my position is appointed, so I would be the purchasing agent.
But you're also the director approving purchases. Is that correct?
I am the second level, yes.
Mr. Call, I believe he's asking who's the employee that was hired to oversee the purchasing, work
That's-
with the departments.
That's correct. So we have a purchasing specialist within the finance department. So she approves the requisitions and then she approves the purchase orders. She approves as level 1 and then I come in and approve as level 2.
Okay.
So we have to have 2 levels of approval
Right.
for internal controls.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Coles, you, in response to Mr. Clay's question about the local participation, I simply can't remember, but there, as I recall, there was a percentage difference that a local purveyor of products could be slightly different. I don't know if it's in the policy or not, but only because I've been around too long. We had this come up years ago on a tree contract, and it was, we wanted to go local. The city manager, previous city manager said it wasn't close enough. So my question is just, is there a dollar amount? Is there a percentage amount that says if it is a local company that they get a little bit more leeway, or is that not in the policy?
To my knowledge, it's not in the policy on that verbiage. It's just, we just try to maintain local.
Right. Okay. And I'm just trying to remember. I want to say it was 3 or 5% was somehow the guideline that we used back then. But okay, thank you. What other questions of Mr. Cole? Hearing none. Thank you very much for your presentation. Unless members of the body, there's nothing else on our agenda, we will adjourn the study session and be ready for the public session in about 35 minutes. Thank you.